The Robinson family got lost in space.
Yeah, the series was set in the far future, 1997.
1997, yeah.
Do you have a name?
My name's Will Robinson, sir. And I'm not a toy, I'm a boy.
Oh, nonsense.
Most fans remember Lost in Space as campy 60s fun, but if you look closer at the original master tapes, something is deeply wrong. Behind the laugh tracks hid a production so toxic that the cast actually didn't want their names attached to the credits. We're talking about accidental footage that was never meant for broadcast, and one specific episode so disturbing, it nearly got the show pulled from the airwaves forever. Today, we're exposing the Great Robinson cover-up that producers spent decades trying to weird. The strange origin of the show. Everyone remembers Lost in Space as the story of a family stranded somewhere in the galaxy. But what if we told you that the show's very existence is a bit of a television accident? Its roots don't actually begin in outer space at all, but in a 200-year-old adventure novel, a comic book that looked suspiciously similar, and a television producer who saw an opportunity and ran with it. The idea behind the show began in 1812 with a Swiss writer named Johann David Wyss. He wrote a novel called The Swiss Family Robinson about a family shipwrecked on an island and forced to survive using their wits and whatever they could salvage. The book became a classic, read by children around the world for more than a century. More than 100 years later, in 1962, a comic book company called Gold Key released a new series called Space Family Robinson. Their idea was simple: take the shipwrecked family from the original book and put them in outer space. Make them a family traveling through the cosmos, getting into adventures, and meeting aliens. Readers loved the idea, and the comic ran for years, building a small but loyal following along the way. 3 years later, a television producer named Irwin Allen was looking for his next project. Allen had already found success with Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, a science fiction series about a submarine crew. This time, he wanted to do something with family. His original idea was to create a live-action version of the Swiss Family Robinson, but without any spaceships or robots. Surprisingly, the network said no. They wanted him to put it in space. The 1960s were the space age. NASA was launching astronauts. The public was obsessed with rockets and the moon, as well as the possibility of traveling beyond Earth. Network executives at CBS wanted something that felt modern, so they asked Allen to rethink his idea. Allen went back to work, and this time he took the Swiss Family Robinson concept, lifted it into space, and made it a mission to another planet. But there was a problem. The comic book company had been around for 3 years by then, and they noticed the similarities between their book and Allen's show. Soon enough, lawyers got involved, but Allen insisted that he was not aware of the comic when he developed the show. Gold Key Comics could have sued. They had a clear claim to the name and the concept. But instead of fighting, they made a deal. CBS and 20th Century Fox reached an agreement with Gold Key that allowed the show to use the name Robinson. In exchange, the comic book changed its title to Space Family Robinson Lost in Space, taking advantage of the show's publicity. Just like that, the legal battle became a business partnership, and everyone moved forward. Around the same time, another science fiction concept was making the rounds in Hollywood. A writer named Gene Roddenberry had an idea about a starship crew exploring the galaxy, dealing with political issues and moral dilemmas. He called it Star Trek, and he pitched it to CBS, the same network that was looking at Lost in Space. The executives had a choice to make. Both shows were science fiction, but with two very different approaches. They looked at Roddenberry's concept and decided it was too cerebral, too complicated, and too hard to sell to mainstream audiences. Allen's concept, on the other hand, had family and adventure and felt familiar, even in a futuristic setting. CBS said yes to Lost in Space, and Star Trek went to NBC instead. And this decision shaped the future of science fiction on television. Lost in Space premiered on September 15, 1965. It ran for 3 seasons and produced 83 episodes. Star Trek also ran for 3 seasons, but only produced 79 episodes. Another odd detail about the show's production that most fans do not know is that the first season was filmed entirely in black and white. This was 1965, and color television had been around for years. In fact, NBC had been broadcasting in color since the 1950s, but CBS was slower to adopt the technology, and Lost in Space was caught in the middle. The first 28 episodes have no color at all, but the 29th episode, which was the season finale, included a few minutes of color as a test. Starting with Season 2, the show switched to full color, and the difference was dramatic. Right from the very beginning, the network had a clear plan for Lost in Space. CBS wanted a family-friendly science fiction show that could compete with NBC's lineup. They believed Irwin Allen's reputation for big, spectacular productions would help attract strong ratings. So, they scheduled the show earlier in the week before Star Trek, hoping to capture viewers first. The strategy worked fairly well. Lost in Space consistently performed solidly in its time slot, competing against The Virginian on NBC and Batman on ABC while still managing to hold its own. But there was another problem. CBS could not quite decide what it wanted the series to be. In some promotions, it was sold as a serious space adventure, full of danger and exploration. In others, it was treated like a lighthearted comedy meant for families. The two ideas did not always fit together, and critics were unsure how to judge them. But the audience, especially younger viewers, didn't seem to care. They simply enjoyed the strange new world the show created every week. What most viewers never realized was that this confusion on screen reflected the reality behind the scenes. The show's cast was assembled through a series of unusual choices. Some characters were created or reshaped at the last minute, and a few surprising decisions behind the scenes ended up changing the entire direction of the series. Weird casting and character facts. One of the strangest things about Lost in Space is that 2 of its most famous characters were not supposed to be there at all. When the show was first created, there was no Dr. Zachary Smith or a talking robot. The family was simply alone, lost in space, trying to find their way home without anyone causing trouble or cracking jokes. The unaired pilot, filmed in 1965, was called No Place to Hide. CBS executives watched it and immediately rejected it. They liked the concept, but they saw a problem. The show had no ongoing conflict. The family could face dangers each week, but those dangers would come and go. There was no character to hate, no one to cause trouble from inside the ship. They told Irwin Allen to add a villain, someone who could create problems episode after episode. Allen went back to work, and he created Dr. Zachary Smith, a saboteur who sabotages the ship and gets trapped along with the family. The initial plan was for Smith to do his damage in the first episode, causing the ship to go off course. Then he dies, and the family continues their journey without him. But then Jonathan Harris started acting, and the producers fell in love with him. Harris was a trained stage actor with decades of experience. He took the role of Dr. Smith and played it bigger than anyone expected. He delivered his lines and moved like someone performing on a Broadway stage. The producers watched the dailies and realized they could not kill this guy. He was too good and far too entertaining. So, they rewrote the scripts to keep him alive, and Dr. Smith went from a one-off villain to the heart of the show. From that moment on, Lost in Space was not the same series they had pitched. The tone shifted from serious adventure to campy comedy. Critics argued about whether this was a good thing, but audiences loved him. Jonathan Harris knew what he had. He realized that being part of an ensemble meant sharing credit with 6 other actors. So, in a bid to stand out, he went to the producers with a demand that was unusual in television history. He asked to be billed as a special guest star in every episode. The producers could have said no. Guest stars are usually actors who appear once or twice, not actors who are in every scene. But Harris had leverage. The show needed him, so they agreed to his terms. For the entire run of Lost in Space, Jonathan Harris was credited as special guest star in every single episode, even though he was a regular cast member. It was a vanity credit, but it was also smart. It set him apart and reminded audiences that Dr. Smith was something special. Harris did not stop there. He rewrote much of his own dialogue. The scripts would come in, and he would change lines, add phrases, and create moments that were not on the page. He came up with catchphrases that became famous. "Oh, the pain. You bubble-headed booby." These were not in the original scripts. They came from Harris, performing and improvising and making the role his own. The rest of the cast had to adjust. Guy Williams played John Robinson, the father of the family. He had been a star before this show, famous for playing Zorro on television. When he signed on to Lost in Space, he expected to be the lead. But as Dr. Smith grew more popular, Williams found himself with less lines and screen time. This reportedly made him very frustrated. He had gone from starring in his own show to standing in the background while a man in a velvet vest stole every scene. June Lockhart played Maureen Robinson. She was a respected actress with Broadway credits and a career that stretched back decades. She brought dignity to the role, but the writers did not give her much to work with. Maureen was a biochemist, trained and qualified, but she mostly cooked, worried, and waited for her husband to solve problems. It was a strange waste of both the actress and the character. Bill Mumy played Will Robinson. He was 10 years old when the show started, and he became the emotional center of the family. His bond with the robot was the heart of the series. Mumy later said that he and Jonathan Harris improvised many of their scenes together. Angela Cartwright played Penny Robinson. She was given odd traits that never quite fit together. She talked to animals, kept a diary, and had adventures that happened off-screen. But Cartwright often felt sidelined and left to watch, while Will got all the good scenes with the robot and Dr. Smith. Marta Kristen played Judy Robinson, the older sister. Her role was supposed to include romance with Major Don West, played by Mark Goddard. But that subplot came and went, depending on who was writing the script that week. In one episode, they were in love. The next episode, they barely acknowledged each other. The character Don West, played by Mark Goddard, also started as a competent officer who could be trusted in a crisis. But as the show went on, he was reduced to comic situations, often playing the straight man to Dr. Smith's antics. And this shift frustrated him. All of these changes happened because one character survived when he was supposed to die. But that was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, the production was full of mistakes and oddities that fans never noticed. The sets had secrets. The props were not what they seemed. And some of the most famous moments in the show happened entirely by accident. The production mistakes fans didn't notice. The producers of Lost in Space had one priority every week: get the family to a new planet, have some adventures, and make sure Dr. Smith got a chance to be funny. Everything else was optional. While this approach made the show successful, it led to some of the most bizarre production mistakes in television history. One of the most obvious mistakes was the planets. The Robinson family was lost in space, drifting through the galaxy with no control over where they landed. And yet, week after week, they found themselves on planets that looked exactly like Southern California. There were deserts with the same rocks, forests with the same trees, and caves that appeared in episode after episode but were just rearranged a little. Unlike actual space, the air was always breathable. The gravity was always Earth normal, and the temperature was always comfortable. The Robinsons always stepped out of their spaceship wearing regular clothes, with no helmets, suits, or protection from whatever alien atmosphere might be waiting. Star Trek, which aired around the same time, at least tried to explain things with their show. They had the Prime Directive and the scientific officers who talked about atmospheric composition. Lost in Space, they, on the other hand, had none of that. The show's producer, Irwin Allen, wanted adventure, not lectures. He wanted kids to watch and dream, not question whether a planet orbiting a dying star would really have oak trees. Another bizarre error the producers overlooked was the ship itself. The Jupiter 2 was supposed to be a small spacecraft designed for a single mission to another planet. But viewers noticed that its interior changed size depending on what the story needed. In some episodes, the control room felt cramped, with barely enough space for the family to stand together. However, in other episodes, there were long hallways leading to rooms that had never been shown before. Sometimes, there were even storage areas that appeared out of nowhere, and sleeping quarters that seemed to double in size. Fans have joked for decades that the Jupiter 2 must have had elastic walls, or maybe just infinite space hidden behind those curved panels. The truth behind this error is that the production team built a few sets and then reused them constantly. If they needed a new room for a scene, they would take an existing set, move some furniture around, and call it something else. They simply hoped viewers would not notice that the ship kept changing shape, and most viewers did not, at least not right away. The laser guns the family carried were another production material that had a bizarre backstory to it. They looked futuristic and dangerous, at least to a child watching in 1965. But most fans never realized that they were actually modified toys. The production team took ordinary toy guns, painted them, added plastic pieces, and called them weapons of the future. Some of them came from other Fox productions, were borrowed from the prop department, and were never returned. They broke constantly, and they looked flimsy up close. But on screen, with the right lighting and a fast-moving story, they worked well enough. One of the most controversial moments in the show's entire run came near the very end. In Season 3, Episode 23, titled The Great Vegetable Rebellion, the series produced what many viewers still consider one of the strangest episodes ever put on television. The story begins with Dr. Smith wandering across yet another Earth-like planet. At first, nothing seems unusual, but then he spots a carrot growing out of the ground and casually pulls it up. What happens next turns the episode into something completely unexpected. The carrot suddenly transforms into a living creature, a sentient vegetable named Tybo. The character was played by actor Stanley Adams, who appeared on screen dressed in a full vegetable costume. Tybo looked like a walking plant with a human face, dressed in leaves and vines and whatever the wardrobe department could find. He was supposed to be menacing, the ruler of a planet where vegetables had evolved to dominate. But he just looked ridiculous, like a prop from a school play, filmed in color and broadcast to millions. Bill Mumy, who played Will Robinson, reportedly took one look at the script and refused to appear. He was 14 years old by then, old enough to know that this episode was a mistake. He told the producers it was too silly. He did not want his face attached to it. So, they filmed without him, writing Will out of the story and focusing on the other characters. The episode aired on March 6, 1968, and the fans who watched it could barely believe what they were seeing. This was the moment when Lost in Space officially began to go downhill. In fact, critics point to The Great Vegetable Rebellion as the moment the show's original vision completely collapsed. There is another odd detail about the show that fans often get wrong, and it's the episode count. Lost in Space ran for 83 episodes across 3 seasons, but because the first season was in black and white and the next 2 were in color, people remember it differently. Some think there were fewer episodes. Some think there were more. Syndication packages over the years have often emphasized the color episodes, leaving the black and white ones to fade from memory. The uneven tone between seasons only adds to the confusion. All of these bizarre mistakes eventually added to the show's magic over time, and through it all, one character remained constant. The robot quickly became one of the most recognizable figures on the show, a mechanical guardian always warning the crew of danger. It was a creative addition that audiences loved. But behind the scenes, the reality of bringing the robot to life was far stranger than anything the writers ever imagined. The truth about the robot. Most fans remember the robot as one of the most beloved characters on Lost in Space. It was tall and boxy, with a clear bubble for a head and mechanical arms that moved in a strange, jerky way. Its voice was authoritative, sometimes sarcastic, but always memorable. Children loved it, and adults admired the technology. But what most people do not realize is that the robot was not actually one character at all. It was 2 people working together, and neither of them got the credit they deserved. The man inside the costume was named Bob May. He was a struggling actor when he took the job, and he had no idea what he was signing up for. The costume he wore was a marvel of 1960s design, but it was also a nightmare to inhabit. It weighed more than 200 pounds. The interior was hot, cramped, and completely lacking in ventilation. Bob could not see where he was going or hear well inside the helmet. He had to be guided around the set by stagehands who would tap him on the shoulder to tell him which way to walk. Between takes, he often had to be lifted out of the costume because he could not get out on his own. Sometimes he collapsed inside it from heat exhaustion. He later described the experience as being buried alive. But he kept doing it, episode after episode, because he believed in the character and because the work mattered to him. He gave the robot its physical presence, its movements, and its gestures. But the voice of the robot belonged to someone else entirely. Dick Tufeld was a voice actor and narrator who had worked with producer Irwin Allen before. He recorded all of the robot's lines in a studio, separate from the filming. The challenge was that Bob May had to move in sync with words he could not hear. He had to learn the timing of Tufeld's delivery and perform his gestures to match the voice, creating the illusion that the robot was speaking as it moved. Tufeld also narrated the opening of every episode. His narration became as iconic as the robot itself, though many viewers did not connect the two at first. Even though the robot costume was extremely uncomfortable to wear, it was also incredibly valuable. The design came from production designer Robert Kinoshita, who had already created one of the most famous robots in science fiction years earlier. Kinoshita was the mind behind Robbie the Robot from the 1956 film Forbidden Planet. So, when Irwin Allen needed a robot for his new series, Kinoshita drew on everything he had learned from that earlier design. The result was impressive, but expensive. The robot costume reportedly cost around $70,000, an enormous amount for a television prop at the time. Adjusted for today's money, that would equal hundreds of thousands of dollars. The suit itself was surprisingly complex. Its arms were made of accordion-like tubing that could extend and retract during filming. The robot's clear plastic dome was carefully molded so lights inside could flash, rotate, and glow. The body was covered with panels, switches, and blinking lights that made it look like a real working machine rather than just a costume. Because the robot was so expensive, the crew had to handle it carefully. The mechanical arms were fragile and often broke during filming. The clear dome had to be constantly maintained to prevent any cracks. And inside the suit was actor Bob May, who was completely sealed into the costume during scenes. Whenever May needed to leave the suit, technicians had to use tools to open it. If he became overheated or started to feel ill, filming had to stop while the crew carefully worked to get him out. Over time, the robot grew from a simple machine into one of the show's most memorable characters. In the early episodes, it was mostly a tool, helping the Robinson family with tasks and warning them about danger. But as the series continued, the writers began giving it more personality. The robot developed a sarcastic edge, especially in its exchanges with the scheming Dr. Smith. The two often traded insults, and more than once the robot managed to outwit him. At the same time, the robot formed a close bond with young Will Robinson, the youngest member of the family. Their friendship became one of the emotional centers of the show. While Dr. Smith provided much of the comedy, the relationship between Will and the robot gave the story a sense of loyalty and protection that audiences connected with. After Lost in Space ended, the robot continued to live on in popular culture. The original costume was carefully preserved and became a treasured piece of television history. But while the robot became an icon, the actor behind it remained mostly out of the spotlight. And as the series grew more popular, rumors began to spread about unexpected romances forming behind the scenes. These rumors would follow the cast long after the cameras stopped rolling. The romance rumors that followed the show. When a television show becomes popular, audiences often have trouble separating the characters from the people who play them. Fans watch these actors week after week, seeing them laugh together, cry together, and in some cases, fall in love with each other on screen. It is only natural to wonder whether those feelings carried over when the cameras stopped rolling. Lost in Space was no exception. Over the years, rumors circulated about romances between cast members, some of them persistent enough to follow the actors for decades. The most common rumors centered on Marta Kristen and Mark Goddard. Kristen played Judy Robinson, the oldest daughter, while Goddard played Major Don West, the pilot who joined the family on their journey. From the beginning, the writers intended for these two characters to have a romantic connection. They exchanged frequent glances and had moments that hinted at something deeper between them. Fans picked up on it immediately, and soon fans were convinced Kristen and Goddard were involved off-screen as well. But in reality, Kristen and Goddard were just close friends, nothing more. They spent time together at promotional events because that was part of the job. They posed for photographs together because the studio wanted to promote the romance angle. But when the cameras were gone, they went their separate ways. Kristen was focused on her career, while Goddard was a married man with children at home. The romance existed only in the scripts and in the imaginations of viewers who wanted to believe it was real. Another rumor involved the two youngest members of the cast. Bill Mumy played Will Robinson, and Angela Cartwright played his sister Penny. They were both teenagers during the run of the show, and fans who watched them interact sometimes speculated about a youthful romance blossoming behind the scenes, but that never happened. Mumy and Cartwright developed a bond over the years, but it was the bond of siblings, not sweethearts. They grew up together on that set. They went through the awkwardness of adolescence, while cameras rolled and scripts demanded they act natural. They supported each other through the challenges of being young in a business that does not always treat young people well. But romance never entered the picture. Both of them made this clear in interviews years later, looking back on those days with affection, but no trace of hidden longing. June Lockhart, who played Maureen Robinson, the mother of the family, also faced her fair share of romance rumors. She was a respected actress with a career that stretched back to Broadway and Hollywood's golden age. On set, she was a professional and a mentor to the younger actors, But her glamorous Hollywood persona, built over decades of appearing in films and magazines, made her a target for gossip columns. There were whispers about her flirting with actors outside the show. Lockhart ignored it all, always insisting that the only thing that mattered was the work. In reality, Lost in Space was actually a working show, not a romantic playground. The cast spent long hours together in hot studios and on location shoots. They dealt with demanding schedules, complicated costumes, and the pressure of keeping a popular series on the air. When the day ended, most of them went home to their different families, not their colleagues. Which of these behind-the-scenes facts about Lost in Space do you find the most bizarre? Let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.